You actually thought we put you on the guest list? My fiancé's mother said, loud enough for the three couples standing nearest to us to turn and look. Sweetheart, this is a firm event. I smiled. I said nothing. I handed my glass of sparkling water to a passing server, picked up my clutch from the table I had quietly arranged the catering contract for 6 weeks earlier, and walked out through the lobby of the Four Seasons without looking back. That was the night everything changed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Audrey. I was 34 when this happened. On paper, I was a mid-level grants coordinator at a nonprofit arts foundation in Chicago. I drove a used Honda Civic. I clipped coupons. I split entrees when my fiancé and I went out to dinner, which was his idea, and I went along with it because I thought that was what you did when someone you loved was under financial pressure. His name was Garrett. He was 37, a third-year associate at a mid-size corporate law firm, the kind that had its name etched in gold on the elevator panel and hosted client appreciation events that felt more like auditions. He had gone to Northwestern Law on loans, he told me. He was still paying them down. He talked about money the way some people talk about a chronic illness, carefully and with visible fatigue. I believed him. That was my first mistake. Not because he was lying about the loans. He wasn't. He just wasn't telling me everything. We met at a fundraiser, ironically one my father's foundation had co-sponsored. I was there in my nonprofit capacity, wearing a dress I'd had for 4 years, genuinely not thinking about who owned the room. Garrett came over and introduced himself and told me he admired people who worked in the public sector. He had a way of making you feel like the most grounded person in a very shallow pool. I liked that about him. I liked him. 6 months in, he mentioned the loans again. Specifically, he mentioned that he'd had an unexpected billing dispute with his servicer and was short on rent for the month. Just once, he said. He'd pay me back. I transferred $1,400 without thinking twice. He paid me back in $3,400 without thinking twice. He paid me back in 3 weeks. I forgot about it almost immediately. The second time was 4 months later. His car needed a transmission repair, $2,200. He asked if I could cover it, and he'd reimburse me from his next paycheck. I covered it. He paid half back and then mentioned, gently, that the other half would have to wait because he'd had to help his mother with something. I nodded. I understood. I told myself these were anomalies. I told myself this was partnership. By the time we got engaged, 18 months after we met at a rooftop restaurant he insisted on picking, which I later realized I had unknowingly paid for through a joint account we'd opened for shared expenses. The transfers had become routine, not every month, but often enough that I had stopped tracking them. I trusted him, and I had the means to absorb the losses without feeling them, which meant I had no real reason to pay attention. Here's what I had not told Garrett. My father is Edward Calloway. If you're in Chicago finance, real estate, or philanthropic circles, you know that name. He built a commercial real estate portfolio over 40 years that now includes 11 properties in the Loop alone. He is not flashy. He is not on magazine covers. He gives quietly and expects nothing back except competence. He raised me the same way. When I was 26, I came into a trust that my grandmother had set up. It was substantial. I managed it carefully, invested it conservatively, and lived on my nonprofit salary because I genuinely liked my work, and my father had always believed you should earn the life you live, not inherit it passively. I drove the Civic. I split the entrees. It wasn't performance. It was just how I was raised. But I had also, and this is the part that matters, decided early in my relationship with Garrett that I would not disclose any of this until I was certain he was with me for the right reasons. I'd learned that lesson once before, in my late 20s, with a man who changed almost overnight the moment he found out about my father. I wasn't doing that again. So I watched, and I waited, and for a long time, I thought Garrett was passing the test. The first crack appeared about 8 months before the Four Seasons. I was at his apartment when he stepped out to take a call. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't looking for anything, I was just standing nearby, and I saw the corner of an email thread that stopped me cold. The subject line was, Bridgewater deposition, cover my costs? The name on the thread was a woman's. The reply at the top, from Garrett, said, "That works. Transfer to the usual account. And don't mention it to anyone at the firm." I closed the laptop before he came back. I didn't say anything that night. But I started paying attention differently after that. Over the next 6 weeks, I noticed things I had explained way before. The inconsistency between how he talked about money and how he actually seemed to spend it when he thought I wasn't watching. The weekend trips he took for depositions in cities where I knew his firm had no active cases. I had quietly learned his firm's docket through a contact I didn't mention. The way certain names appeared in his phone and disappeared again. The careful vagueness about where his money actually went. I hired a private investigator. Not the dramatic kind. A quiet, methodical woman named Helen who had a background in forensic accounting and charged accordingly. I told her I needed a full picture. She delivered one. What she found was methodical in the way that only long-practiced dishonesty can be. Garrett had, over the course of his career and personal life, cultivated a pattern. He identified women with financial stability who were not flashy about it, practical women. Private women. Women who would extend help without demanding receipts. He built intimacy carefully. He introduced need gradually. He never took enough at once to trigger alarm. He was, Helen told me with professional detachment, very good at it. There had been 2 women before me. One was a physician in Evanston who had covered his bar exam prep costs, his laptop, and 4 months of his car note before she ended the relationship over what she thought was just an incompatibility. She didn't know about the money pattern until Helen contacted her. The other was a marketing director who had co-signed on a personal loan that Garrett had stopped making payments on 6 months after they broke up. She was still dealing with the credit impact. Neither of them knew about each other. Neither of them knew about me. I sat with that information for 2 weeks. I didn't confront him. I didn't change my behavior. I kept making dinner, kept answering his texts, kept wearing my modest clothes and driving my Civic and saying yes when he suggested we split things. I had a plan, and the plan required patience. The 4 Seasons event was his firm's annual partner appreciation dinner. Garrett had been angling for a promotion to senior associate 1 step below partner for over a year. The dinner was the unofficial audition. Bring a polished, appropriate partner, impress the right people, look like someone ready for the next level. He had spent 3 weeks preparing me for it. Appropriate dress, appropriate conversation topics. Don't mention the nonprofit too prominently. Some of these guys don't get the public sector thing, he said, with a small apologetic smile. I nodded. I bought a dress that was nice but not conspicuous. I practiced being exactly what he needed me to be. What Garrett didn't know was that my father had been a quiet major donor to the firm's pro bono initiative for 6 years. He had never attended an event. He was not on their website. He was, as is his habit, entirely invisible in the ways that mattered. He was not invisible that night. I had called my father 2 weeks earlier and told him, for the first time, everything. He listened without interrupting, which is how I knew he was genuinely angry. My father only goes quiet when something is serious. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" I told him. We arrived at the 4 Seasons together, Garrett and I, and for the first hour, everything was ordinary. He worked the room. I stood at his side and smiled and answered questions carefully. I watched him shift posture when he talked to partners, shoulders back, voice lower, a version of himself that was visibly constructed. I had seen this before and told myself it was just professional nerves. Now I understood it differently. His mother was there. She had driven down from Naperville for the occasion and had been installed at a corner table with 2 other senior wives, holding a glass of Chardonnay like a scepter. She had never warmed to me. She had a way of looking at me that suggested she found me adequate but not impressive, not the right kind of woman for her son's trajectory. I was getting myself a glass of water at the bar when I felt her appear beside me. "I need to ask you something," she said, not unpleasantly, "and I hope you won't take it the wrong way." I turned. "We're moving the dinner to the private dining room in about 20 minutes. Spouses and official partners only. Firm policy for the formal portion." She paused. I don't think Garrett put you on the formal list. I'm sure it was just an oversight. But you understand. She was smiling. It was the kind of smile it is designed to look like kindness while functioning as something else entirely. You actually thought we'd put you on the guest list? She added, when I didn't respond quickly enough. Sweetheart, this is a firm event. The three couples nearest to us had turned to look. One of the women, I would find out later she was the wife of the managing partner, was watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. I smiled. I said nothing. I handed my glass of sparkling water to a passing server, picked up my clutch, and walked out. In the elevator, I texted my father one word, now. By the time I reached the lobby, he was already there. Edward Calloway in a charcoal suit I had not seen before, standing with the kind of stillness that only people who are entirely comfortable with their own authority can manage. He kissed my cheek. He did not ask if I was all right. He knew I was. The managing partner, I said. I know, he said. He called me 10 minutes ago. It turned out that my father's quiet 6-year relationship with the firm's pro bono initiative had, in the last 2 weeks, quietly become something else entirely. He had indicated interest in becoming a named benefactor of the firm's new community legal clinic, a project that required significant outside funding and that the managing partner had been trying to secure for 18 months. The announcement was being finalized. My father had suggested it might be appropriate to make it at tonight's dinner. The managing partner had been very enthusiastic. I went back upstairs, not through the main entrance, through a side corridor that connected to the private dining room where the formal dinner had just begun. My father walked beside me. The room went quiet in the gradual, spreading way that rooms go quiet when something unexpected enters. Garrett saw me first, then he saw my father. I watched the recognition happen in his face, slow, then sudden, like ice cracking. The managing partner stood up. Ed, he said, and his voice had the particular warmth that very powerful men reserve for other very powerful men. I didn't know you were bringing. My daughter, my father said. Audrey. The room was very quiet. Garrett's mother, who had positioned herself 2 seats from the head of the table, looked between my father and me with an expression I will not soon forget. It was the look of someone doing a rapid and terrible calculation. I walked to where Garrett was sitting. I placed one hand flat on the table in front of him and leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. I've been thinking about what you said to your colleague in that email, I said quietly, about not mentioning things to anyone. Good advice. I've tried to apply it. I straightened up. I reached into my clutch, removed the engagement ring, a tasteful 1.8-carat oval that he had picked out, and I had, without his knowledge, paid for, and set it on the table next to his water glass. I do hope you get the promotion, I said at normal volume. You've worked so hard. Then I went to find the managing partner's wife because she was the one I actually needed to speak with. Her name was Barbara. She was in her 60s, sharp in the way that women who have navigated powerful rooms for decades become sharp. And she'd been watching me all evening with that unreadable expression. We found a quiet corner, and I told her, briefly and without drama, what I knew about Garrett's financial pattern. I told her about the 2 women. I gave her Helen's contact information. I told her that I was not interested in revenge. I was interested in accuracy, and in making sure the women he had taken advantage of had access to the documentation they needed if they chose to pursue any legal remediation. Barbara listened. She did not seem surprised. She seemed instead like a woman who had suspected something adjacent to this for a while and had been waiting for confirmation. I'll make sure Helen's report reaches the right people, she said. That's all I'm asking, I said. The managing partner's announcement about my father's donation went ahead as planned. Garrett sat through it in perfect stillness. The kind of stillness that is not calm, but the absence of any available response. His mother did not speak for the remainder of the evening. In the weeks that followed, the firm's ethics committee received Helen's full report. 2 of Garrett's former colleagues, it turned out, had their own concerns. They had not known how to formalize. The physician in Evanston was contacted. She retained a lawyer. The marketing director was contacted. Her credit claim was reactivated with new supporting documentation. Garrett was placed on administrative leave during the investigation. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I didn't need to. My father and I had dinner the following Sunday at his house in Lincoln Park, the house I grew up in, with the kitchen that always smells like coffee and wood smoke. He made pasta, which he has done every Sunday since my mother died. He didn't say much about Garrett. He asked about my work. He asked about a foundation board meeting I had coming up. We talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of it. On the drive home, I thought about what I had told Barbara that night, that I wasn't interested in revenge, only accuracy, and I realized that was true, but it was also incomplete. What I was actually interested in was this, that the women Garrett had carefully, patiently, skillfully taken from would have the same access to the truth that I'd had. That they wouldn't have to keep absorbing losses and calling them oversights. That they would have paperwork and lawyers and the knowledge that they had not imagined it. That felt, to me, like the right kind of ending. The Civic is still in my parking spot. I haven't traded it in. I'm not in a hurry. I've learned there's a particular freedom in being underestimated. In moving through rooms where no one has calculated your value yet, it gives you time to see clearly. To notice what people do when they think the stakes are low. To decide without pressure exactly what you want to do about it. And when the moment comes, you pick up your clutch, walk out through the lobby, and let everything else follow naturally from there. I've thought a lot about the moment I handed that ring back, not the drama of it. There wasn't much drama, which I think surprised people more than anything else. Just the ring on the white tablecloth next to his water glass, and then me walking away. People expect rage in those moments. They expect tears or a raised voice or something that lets everyone in the room exhale and categorize what they just witnessed. I didn't give them that. I'm not sure I had it to give. What I felt was something quieter, something closer to clarity. The thing about Garrett is that he wasn't stupid. That's what I keep coming back to. He was patient, careful, genuinely perceptive about people. He identified exactly what kind of woman I was. Private, practical, not interested in performing wealth. And he used that understanding with precision. In another life, those same instincts might have made him exceptional at something worth doing. But he chose to aim them at taking. And that choice, compounded quietly over years, is what brought him to that room, sitting perfectly still while my father's name was announced, to the very partners he'd spent years trying to impress. I used to wonder if I was foolish for not seeing it sooner. I spent some honest time with that question, but I think the more accurate thing is that I was trusting, which is not the same thing. Trust, when it's healthy, is a choice you make with your eyes open. I had extended it too freely, kept renewing it past the point where the evidence warranted it. That's not stupidity. That's a habit I had to examine and correct, and I did. What I'm most proud of, more than any of the specific outcomes, is that I didn't act from anger. I acted from a decision. There's a difference, and it matters. Anger would have had me confronting him the night I saw that email thread. It would have been loud and immediate and ultimately satisfying to no one, least of all the 2 women in Evanston and downtown whose situations still needed to be addressed. Choosing to wait, to document, to think about what outcome I actually wanted rather than what felt good in the moment, that required something from me. Something I had to consciously build day by day over those quiet weeks. Helen, the investigator, told me once that most people who come to her want ammunition. They want to win. What I came to her with was different. I wanted accuracy. I wanted a full picture, and then I wanted to use that picture responsibly. There's a version of the story where I just protect myself and walk away. But there were other women still absorbing losses they didn't have names for yet, doing right by them. Even anonymously, even when it cost me additional time and discomfort, was the part that actually let me sleep at night. I think we are tested, quietly and repeatedly, by the choices we make when no one is watching and when the easier path is clearly visible. Garrett had 100 moments where he could have chosen differently. So did I. The difference is what we each decided those moments were for. The Civic is still in the parking spot. I haven't replaced it. Some mornings I think about that. About how much of my life looks exactly the same from the outside as it did before, and how completely different it feels from the inside. That's the part nobody talks about. The after isn't a grand reveal. It's just Tuesday, with better information and a clearer sense of what you're willing to carry and what you're not. I'm not carrying it anymore. That's enough.